1. I live in Arizona. It's a pretty nice place to live for 9 out of the 12 months of the year. But the other 3... yuck. It turns into a hot, sweaty, oh Jesus why fire pit fueled by the yellow orb of death that judges us all. And unfortunately for me, the biggest con of the season just happens to be in the starting season for this ungodly heat. But every year I suit up, count out the money in my wallet, and pray for deliverance as I truck on over to the convention hall. Phoenix Comic-Con is definitely one of my guilty pleasures. But holy crap, I did not expect this to happen this year. For those of you not in the know, this year during the very first day of convention, a mentally unwell individual brought in knives, guns, and apparently throwing stars into the convention as part of a poorly thought-out plot to shoot the cops that were there. I was about 10 feet away from the guy when he was arrested, and I honestly had no idea what had happened until later that day. It went down like this. Me and a friend had gotten out of a panel and needed a place to chill out and relax until the next one we had lined up got started. My friend, for some reason I am not entirely clear on, couldn't sit down on the floor comfortably, and I myself was encased in a collection of cardboard boxes that didn't exactly lend itself to small spaces like a chair. I decided that we would do well to chill over by the windows. It had a large floor space and plenty of chairs, as well as handily being pretty close to where we needed to go next. It seemed pretty simple, as all we needed to do was sit, chill, and scowl impatiently down at our schedules as we waited for time to magically speed up and carry us onwards throughout our day. As we sat down, somehow neither of us winding up anywhere near the chairs I was aiming for, I noticed security talking to an overweight man in a crappy Deadpool costume. The guy was sitting alone on a bench meant for 2, with his back to the wall. The security was talking into the mic at his chest. Across the hall, another officer waited and watched the pair intently. If I'm being honest, I really thought the guy had reported a theft or something, and security was describing whoever did the thieving into the radio, so people could keep an eye out. A bit odd, but not something I really needed to pay attention to. I was more concerned with the fact that my friend had just sat down on the ground. You told me you couldn't do that. What the heck? As I grumped at my friend and opened my water bottle to get a quick drink, I was watching the saga of thievery unfold, with all the interest I normally reserve for daytime television dramas. That is to say, I was bored out of my skull, and felt kinda bad for the guy because he seemed really upset. I was debating asking the dude with the love pillow, a guy that was sitting right behind the officer, if we could have his chair so my friend didn't ruin her heckin' costume. The heathen. When all of a sudden security started grappling with the guy. I was confused. Not really scared, but more, what the heck? Is this really happening? I kept thinking that as I watched the guy get wrestled down to the ground, as he had his arms and legs tied together with that weird-ass belt thing, as he asked for some ID, as he kept shouting, "You need to listen to me! You aren't listening!" Maybe he had a mental break. I had no idea what was going on. I still had no idea what was going on as I watched one of the cops, now only one of, I think, 4, maybe 3, withdraw from his frisk search and unload a series of spectacularly shiny bullets onto the cushion. Plink, plink, plink. I had never seen a gun in person before. I had never seen bullets in person before. The closest I could come to this experience was finding burnt-out shotgun shells in the fields where me and my family go camping, and getting a bit uneasy when I watched our dogs traipse through the forest, wondering if some stupid hunter was going to mistake our largest brown goofball for a deer and get him right through the head. I watched, we watched. I tugged on my friend's arm to stand her up. And we left the scene behind us, trading whispers and glances, and worries as we hurried down the hall. I remember texting my mom, "Hey, so I just watched a guy get arrested and dogpiled for bringing a loaded gun in the con," and then putting the incident out of my mind for the rest of the day. I didn't realize how close I came to death. If those officers had dealt with that man just a smidgen less carefully, I could have been dead. A little less competent, and everyone in that hall could have been shot. An inch less expertise, and I am 900% sure someone wouldn't have gone home that day. Glad it wasn't me. 2. This story takes place when I was 8. I was a complete tomboy as a child, and was frequently mistaken for a boy, particularly because I go by the name Sam. I always wore ratty t-shirts, jeans, and a baseball cap, so unless people saw my face or my ponytail, they usually didn't realize I was a girl. I had no sense of self-preservation whatsoever back then, and used to go clambering all through a scrapyard that was part of the farm at the back of our house. It was pretty cool because most of the stuff had been there for ages and had plant life growing on it. Some of the stacks of cars were 7 or 8 high, so you could get a great view of the surrounding area, and turn some of the less rusted ones into a high height. My older brother kept his smokes, lads' mags, and a bit of weed in one of them, all of which interested me to various amounts when I discovered them as an 8-year-old, particularly when he got too high to climb up without risking the whole thing coming down. And they basically became mine. My prized possession, though, was his BB rifle and the tin of lead BBs he kept there. The range was shite on the ground, but with a bit of height behind you it could take out the windows, or what was left of them, on some of the old farm equipment opposite the stack. One afternoon I was doing this, smoking away, when the guy who owned the farm scrapyard came out and caught me. I wasn't exactly being subtle, but we lived there for about 6 years at the time, and not once had I seen him there. Initially he just effed and blinded at me to get out and get lost, but once I actually did start to cooperate, get out of the car, and begin climbing down the stack, his tone changed. Suddenly, he was going to take me to his office while he called the police. I couldn't tell why at the time, but something about his tone really raised the hairs on the back of my neck. I think it was mostly because my brother has spent most of my early life telling me that the farmer was a cannibal and grew cocaine for the local cartel. For context of just how gullible I was, we were in northern England. I just couldn't square the idea of this guy calling the cops on me, so I froze about 12 feet above the ground. He shouted more at first. Then he got really sweet, which somehow scared me even more. He started calling me darling, said I wouldn't be in trouble. I could have an ice cream in the office if I wanted to. The way his face changed when I started climbing back up still haunts me to this day. He kicked against the cars lower down, and for a minute I was worried the whole stack would come down. Then he sort of grabbed onto the roof of one car and shook it a bit, as if he was testing whether it was steady enough for him to climb. I never found out what he decided, because at that moment there was a massive crash of glass and a car alarm went off. Both of us looked in the direction it came from, and I could see my brother standing by the smashed window of some shitty old BMW, flicking the V's at this farmer. He lashed another rock at the car and took off, with the farmer in pursuit. I took my chance and legged it back home, then shut myself in my room and cried, presuming my brother was dead. Luckily, he has smackhead speed, and he got back to the house about an hour later, looking a little haunted. But he cooked us some chicken Kievs and made jokes until I'd calmed down. When my dad got back, I think he sensed something was up, but didn't press it. Then a bit later, the police turned up at the house. My brother looked like a dead man walking, but one of them just took him and my dad into the living room to talk, while the others stayed in the room with me. I mostly ignored her because snitches get stitches, but she teased a few details from me about what had happened between me and the farmer. About 15 minutes later, before they were leaving, and it was about the most amicable I've ever seen my dad be with a cop, he just hugged my brother once the door closed and got him a beer, telling him to go up to his room. Once he was gone, I got the bollocking of my life about how dangerous it was to trespass, how damaging other people's property was unacceptable, and how I'd be working at his garage from now on, he's a mechanic, until the summer holidays were over. I quite clearly remember whining and being a full-on ungrateful brat by asking why my brother got away with doing worse, in my eyes, but obviously to no effect. I was banned from the scrapyard, as you'd expect. Not that I was in a hurry to go back. I never mentioned it to my dad until a couple of years ago. I'm now in my mid-20s. It was part of a larger, difficult conversation between us, relating to another story that's possibly a bit dark for this place. But when I brought it up, he actually started shaking. More surprising for me was that he wasn't angry. I thought I'd exaggerated the whole episode in my head, and the farmer was probably some poor dude trying to deal with me being a destructive little shit on his property. But what he said confirmed what I'd begun to wonder. The farmer in question was a suspected sex offender, but only by word of mouth. It was rumored among the locals, including my brother and the police who'd come round, but he never got convicted until his daughter spoke out a few years back. The reason my dad forced me to work at the garage was, basically, to keep me away from there while he looked for a new house. 3. Some few years ago, a friend of mine in the Navy was given orders to be stationed in Virginia. She had attempted for a while to find a renter for her house, but was unsuccessful. Still hopeful, she offered to let me stay at the place for free if I'd help find a renter and keep maintenance on the place. Additionally, she had to leave one of her cats behind, since she had no room to take it. It seemed a bit negligent if you ask me, but it wasn't my decision, and I love cats. Originally, I was pretty excited to live in a house for free. I live in the barracks, and it can get cramped being in a small room with another person, so I accepted. When I got to the place, however, I was very disappointed. The house was large, but holy hell was it trashed. Junk laid around willy-nilly, dust covered everything, fleas were everywhere, and it definitely smelled like cats lived there. This was pretty surprising to me, since my friend seemed like she was a pretty clean person. Sadly mistaken. Still, I stayed a bit hopeful. It would be simple to get some friends together to clean up the place and make it comfortable. I helped her finish packing, and we sat around and chatted for a bit. That's when she told me about her ex. He was Army, like me, but in a different unit than mine. Originally, he had been charming according to her, but had become unsuitable for her for whatever reason. When she called it off and told him that he had 2 weeks to leave, he became insufferably annoying and childish, hiding her boots, terrorizing the cats, leaving the place a mess more than it already was, and parking his car behind hers so that she couldn't leave without her pitching a fit. He eventually did leave, and that was the end of it. Apparently. After she left, I pretty much stayed away from the place until the scheduled day for me and my buddies to clean up, dropping by every day to clean the cat box and feed the cat. One night, however, after dinner with a friend of mine, she offered to tag along with me to go feed the cat. She was one of the people that had agreed to help clean, so I figured it'd be good to let her see the place to plan out what needed to be done. When we got to the house and stepped out, I remember hearing a loud rustling coming from the surrounding trees. I figured it was some animal. As I think back on it, it could have been my memory just making the situation worse, but it's a pretty big part of the memory. As I walked up to the door, I felt incredibly uneasy, like something was wrong and that I shouldn't be here right now. But I didn't want to waste my friend's time, so I shrugged it off. I was a bit confused when I went to unlock the door as well. The bolt lock was a bit finicky, and sometimes wouldn't unlock properly, so I often had to unlock it multiple times. That is, turn the lock, try to open the door, and so on, until it actually unlocked. This time, however, the door opened after the first turn. At the time, I mostly figured it was just luck, but in the back of my mind I pondered whether or not I had forgotten to lock it to begin with. Either way, after entering, I was about to head upstairs to feed the cat. But when I attempted to flick on the lights in the entryway, only one of the two lit up. The other one didn't, so I assumed it must have blown. When I stepped closer to see, I stepped in a small puddle of water, catching me off guard. Upon closer inspection, I discovered that the light fixture was completely filled with water, and some leak from wherever was dripping water onto the floor. Additionally, I heard a light rumbling that at the time I assumed was the AC. I knew the AC was right above the entryway on the top floor, so I thought maybe it was faulty or had broken and was leaking. I've never owned my own place, so I don't know the ins and outs of this type of stuff, so this made perfect sense at the time. Great, I thought. More issues to address. Still, I was there for a purpose, so I told my friend to check out the place to get an idea of what supplies may be needed to clean it, while I went upstairs to feed the cat. However, before I was even halfway up the stairs, my friend called me back down. She was standing in the kitchen by the back door that led to the porch. The glass from the shattered door window littered the floor. She asked if it had been like that when I'd last left the place, but I could have sworn it wasn't like that when I'd left. After all, I'd only been to the place once or twice since the owner had left, and I was sure that a shattered window would have caught my eye. Judging by the placement of the glass, it definitely had been shattered from the outside. What was strange, however, was that the door was still locked. Not sure if anyone was in the house, I told my friend to stay there while I checked upstairs. I had no weapons on me, and I doubt the place had any guns, but funnily enough, my friend was really into sword collecting, and many of them were downstairs, so I picked one up and tiptoed upstairs, hoping my childhood memories of stick fighting could possibly help me. Luckily, no one else was in the house, but just to be sure, we both waited outside while we called the cops. After calling the cops, I called up the owner and told her everything that had happened. The obvious break-in was very strange. Nothing was stolen, and the place wasn't in any worse state than it was when I left it, as far as I could tell. The place was already trashed anyway to begin with. The only things out of place were the broken door window, that same door still being locked, and the possibly unlocked front door. At the time, I assumed that the water was not associated with the break-in. Because of all of this evidence, we assumed my friend's ex had done it, since it seemed that he either was looking for something specific, or just wanted to be destructive, and probably hadn't even entered the house. According to my friend, he knew that she was gone, but didn't know that anyone was watching the place, so he likely thought the place was fair game for just vandalizing it. Still, beyond the window, I nor the police found anything else. That night, anyway. After this event, I of course was still very uneasy about going back to the place. I'd never dealt with a break-in before, and the then assumption that her ex was just being a dick and lightly vandalizing the place definitely made me not want to stay there for too long, for the fear that I might be around when he next decided to come back. Still, the damned cat, no offense to it, was still there, and I couldn't just let it starve. So while the police were tracking down the proposed suspect, and the insurance company were getting information, I still had to go to the place to feed the cat. I couldn't keep it with me because the barracks don't allow pets, and I had no friends that were willing to take it in. I won't lie, I waited a couple days to go back to that house. I had to work up the courage. I didn't even live there and the prospect creeped me out, so I can only imagine how I'd feel had it been my place. Still, the cat needed to be fed, so off I went. When I walked in, the first thing that hit me was the smell, mildew and mold. Obviously, my barracks were loaded with it, but it was strong enough to overpower even the cat smell. The water leak had become even worse, The hardwood floor and entryway had begun to warp, and the ceiling was dripping. Something definitely wasn't right. It hit me that this leak was much more serious than I had first assumed. This definitely wasn't an AC issue. The roaring could still be heard too. Curious now, and not as panicky as my last venture in the house, I made my way upstairs, sword in hand. At the top of the stairs there is a short hallway that leads to the master bedroom. Along the way there's a storage closet. When I passed the closet, my foot made an audible squelch. There was water here too, which made sense as it was pretty much directly above the entryway, and both the AC and water heater were in the back of the closet. When I entered the master bedroom, however, there was no water, but the roaring sound was louder and sounded more distinct and familiar now. Running water, like what you'd hear from a bathtub. Sure enough, I discovered a door at the back of the bedroom that I hadn't noticed before. It led to a half bath with a toilet and a sink. And in that room was another door. Sure enough, the noise was definitely a running faucet. The carpet in front of that door was soaked beyond belief, and the door was locked. Judging by the placement of the door, the room beyond would have shared a wall with the storage closet, and the tub would literally be right above the house's entryway, explaining the weird water-filled light fixtures, the dripping ceiling, and the leak. At first I figured I might as well bust down the door, since it was obvious that the tub had long since overflown, and the water damage would already be a nightmare to fix. A broken door would be the least of the owner's worries. I stopped myself, though. I didn't know what I'd find behind the door, and I didn't want to go in blindly, so I decided to call the police and get an officer to help instead. He was able to unscrew the knob and get it open. Nothing was behind the door, but sure enough, the tub had been running and had overflown. We turned it off, and the officer added more things to the report that had already been open about the previous incident. Putting this together, I think it's pretty safe to assume what happened. The vandal, almost certainly the owner's ex, had broken in that night, probably just before my friend and I arrived. That could have been the rustling I'd heard, or just my mind tricking me. He'd broken into the place from the back door by smashing the window, and had likely left through the front door, which is why it was unlocked. Now, I'm not 100% sure if this next part was during his original break-in, or if he came back later to do it. But I think that while he was in the house, he went upstairs, plugged the tub, turned the water on, and rigged the door. The vandal obviously wasn't there to steal anything. He just wanted to flood the house because he knew the owner would be away, and that water damage is a nightmare to deal with. I'm pretty sure he did this all in the same night, and that neither the police nor I had discovered the water until a couple days after, which would explain the leak I discovered the night of the break-in. Whatever the case, whoever did it is a vindictive piece of garbage if you ask me. I'm not sure if they ever caught him or anything, or really about anything that ever happened. I gave the key to the insurance people, they were well trusted by the owner, and decided never to go back to the place. Last I heard, she found some new tenants for the place, and it's been fixed up pretty well with no further issues. Hey everyone, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 3 True Scary Stories, episode 227. Big thanks to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Well, I'm recording these on a Monday. That's my first day back working after my rather enjoyable week off. I had a nice mellow time, and it's nice to know that if I need to do that, I'm able to get enough work done so that I can take a week off. I think it took me, let's see, it was Thursday, Friday, Saturday. It took me just over 4 days of constant work to get a week's worth of videos done. It's not an ideal way to do it because it can be quite stressful, but on the plus side, it does mean I then get a week to myself. And so I'll be doing that again come September and probably again at Christmas, actually. That way I get time off, but the channel still keeps running. Okay, with that I'm going to head off for now, so until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.